When I first experienced the Herzfolgen in the Zwillingstürme in Herbst event, it was honestly a bit mixed. On one hand, it was an interesting concept. On the other hand, it was a lot more involved than any of the other Resource Crate mini events that Arknights had previously. I sort of perceived it as a chore that didn't really have a comparable reward as So Long Adele's Siesta in Fashion Street. Admittedly, I was a little bit frustrated at something that I thought was supposed to be a laid-back fun minigame, and instead intended me for it to dedicate more time into picking up the clues from the interviews and using those to discern the characters' emotions. So, as the event passed by, I kind of left Herzefogen alone, missing out on a lot of the interesting interactions with the NPCs, and in hindsight, a pretty fun minigame when you put some effort into it. After grinding the normal stages of the event and ending up with over 100 of each of the notes of emotions that you get after completing a level, I returned back to Herzefogen and started just to tinker around with the combinations that you can do with the notes of emotions. Herzenfolgen is one of the things that I very much regret brushing off so early and not revisiting it until much later on. It was through playing around with the composing art tunes and just messing around with all the different combinations you can make that highlighted the nuances of the graphic design work that was put into this small little minigame, especially when it came to the different emotions and their banners. Herzenfogen includes some great utilization of color, as well as a lot of really clever incorporation of symbolism that really helps convey the emotions that these game elements are trying to represent to the player. So, let's take a look at the graphic design of my favorite part of Zwillingstürme in Herbst. The basis of all emotions within Herzefogen are the notes of emotions, items that are earned through the normal stages of Zwillingstürme. There are 4 different types of general emotions that are represented by the notes of emotions, and can be combined in combinations of 3 to form one of 20 different specific emotions. Taking a look at the icons for the notes of emotions, we can see distinct colors that are representing each of the different notes. For joy, we have yellow, for anger, we have red, for sorrow, we have blue, and for fear, we have green. And we see those colors relatively well matched with complementary colors that are also found within the banner designs as well, with the only slight deviation being joy having more orange in its banner. However, even then, orange is a pretty good complementary color of yellow. Color certainly plays a part in influencing how we associate certain emotions with certain ideas or items, so it might be a good thing to maybe give a little bit of a rundown of what some of these colors associated with the specific emotions and Hertzfolgen might relate to. Yellow, along with orange, has common associations with the feeling of happiness, excitement, warmth, optimism, and positivity. 2 notable examples of where these associations may come from are with the sun and fire, both sources of warmth and light, the latter of which is often being used within the English language in relation to hope, optimism, and positivity. Red has the associations with anger and danger that are perhaps linked to blood, either when someone gets angry and their face is red all over, or when they get injured and they start bleeding. Also, many emergency vehicles are colored red throughout the world, and within the English language, there are common phrases such as in the red or red flag that also serve to link the color red with the idea of danger. Blue has associations with sadness and cold, which may come from the natural examples of water and ice. Within the English language as well, blue is also used directly in reference to sadness in phrases such as feeling blue. Green is where the associations between color and emotion start tapering off and faltering a little for our comparison specifically with the emotions and their colors representing them in Herzfolgen. Green is typically used to represent emotions such as envy and disgust, as well as being associated with ideas of harmony and renewal. And this is where we need to be a little bit careful about trying to associate specific colors with specific emotions, because as of now, there's really no research that has come to the definitive conclusion that there is any sort of natural universal understanding of certain colors being associated with certain emotions. What emotions we associate with specific colors is still very much influenced by our own individual experiences. One example of this that you may have experienced is how Hypergriff publishes their revenue data for Arknights. When there's an increase in revenue for Arknights, Hypergriff actually publishes that increase within red text instead of green text. This certainly goes against how a lot of us might think of reporting financial data, especially since we have the entire saying in the red, meaning that you are in a really bad financial situation. So this is an example of how color can totally be perceived in a different way based on the culture that is being perceived from. But it doesn't discredit any of the prior associations we had talked about with the colors and emotions. It just means that we need to take into account how these colors might be perceived by the general audience that we are trying to present these in. So, going back to the 4 different emotions and the colors that were chosen to represent them, we have a pretty solid grasp of how 3 of them are pretty closely correlated with the emotions that they are assigned to and the colors that they are being presented in. However, we still have the question of green, which is a little bit shaky, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I think another way of looking at the colors that were chosen is to think about what these colors actually mean. Because the 4 colors that were chosen, red, yellow, green, and blue, are very important colors as they are basically the foundational colors for both subtractive and additive colors. Of course, for subtractive colors, you have RYB, red, yellow, and blue, while for additive colors, you have RGB, red, green, and blue. In Herzfolgen, these 4 notes of emotions make up the basis of all the different emotions you can create. In color, these 4 colors basically make up all the different color combinations you can create. And since color is often seen as a sort of representation of emotion, we tend to think about emotions as bringing color into life. This is honestly a really cool and kind of nice little way that they tied in the colors with the emotion aspect of Herzfolgen. In addition to all the emotions you can create with the 4 notes, you can create an additional 3 different variations of each of the 20 different emotions with the ways of want. There are 3 different ways of wants that you can choose for each emotion. You have desire for worldly things, desire for authority, and desire for wisdom. Now, before we get into looking at a lot of the symbolism that is within both the ways of the wands as well as for the emotion banners, I do have to talk about how I am not as well versed within the Lithanian lore as well as the entire storyline around this event. So there might be a couple of symbols or motifs that I may not be able to fully understand, but I am certain that anyone in the comments will be able to pick up from where I've left off and give a lot more insight into some of the cool things that we might find out. So starting off with desire for worldly things, I initially thought that this was some sort of stylized harp, as I knew that the event was very much into the theming of classical music. However, after reading a little bit of the lore, I more likely think that this is a representation of the twisted horns from the Witch King. The desire for authority has the twin towers of Zwillingstürme represented onto there, giving it the direct connection with authority via the empresses. And finally, for the desire for wisdom, I interpreted it as an open book, One thing to note about the Ways of Wands is that when you're choosing to assign them to a card, they're quite ornate, with a lot of really cool design details, such as with the Desire for Authority, you have the Originium shards poking out from on top and underneath. However, once you assign these to a specific emotion card, then when it's displayed on the emotion card, it becomes a lot more simpler, so then it doesn't clutter up the card as much. It clearly tells you what attribute you've attributed to the card, but also does not detract from the card itself and all the cool little details on it. The emotion cards of Herzfolgen are really what made me appreciate this minigame so much. The cards include a lot of fascinating and really clever use of symbolism in order to convey the emotions of the cards and also tell the story that is associated with them through the text. The Joy's Opus is my personal favorite out of all the 4 different cards. Upon first glance of the card, we can clearly see the defining feature of the card, which is the flowering rose. Blooming flowers have a really strong tie with happiness, not least because they are sort of the symbol of new life, but also they are closely related with the season of spring, which is typically a season that is more associated with happiness and energy, coming out of the darkness of winter and getting ready for the arrival of longer and warmer days. There's also a great deal of geometric abstraction with the rose itself, with its vines, its leaves, and in particular the flowers, which I really love how they basically just layered all these different squares and had them in different orientations to basically imitate the look of the stacked up petals that real roses would have. Moving on to the Anger's Opus, we can easily see its defining feature, which are the knives. The knives, of course, give off a very threatening feeling towards it. And rising off from the sides of the card, you can see that we have these plumes of what seem to be of smoke, perhaps evoking images of a smoldering battlefield or the depths of a fiery hell. And behind all these very visible features of the card, we can also notice the subtle inclusion of a 4-stringed instrument in the background, which certainly fits within the event theming of classical music. The Sorrow's Opus is a card that fits exceptionally well with the text that's presented alongside the cards when you first read into them. The raindrops fits well with the overall tone of sadness, and you can see the small little details such as the skyline in the background, as well as even the little top parts of the fence posts for the park as well, which is a really nice detail. Additionally, you can also see the mist at the bottom, which in comparison to the smoke from Anger's Opus, we can kind of see how this is mist rather than smoke, as the mist is staying low and also kind of hovering towards the bottom of the card instead of the smoke which was rising up in the Anger card. Moving on to Fear's Opus, initially this card might seem a little bit more simple than the rest of the cards. The distinct feature of this card is the spire in the middle, which is towering upwards. Certainly this can give connotations of fear. Again, thinking about the authority aspect of towers, that might be where you could get the association with fear from. However, if we read into the text of Fear's Opus, I think this is where some of the other graphics that are on the card really make a lot more sense and just kind of blow your mind at how they sort of connect into the entire card. In the background of Fear's Opus, we can see that there's 2 sort of distinct spirals that are in the back. We have, towards the top, we have spirals of what kind of look like bishop chess pieces, and then at the bottom, we have the tapering curves that are in a sort of figure 8 configuration. Reading into the text of Fear's Opus, we can see how the text references a lot about the idea of endlessness, the eternal palace, the long nights, and how the spire has never divulged what scenery lies at the journey's end. Spirals and circles create a sense of endlessness, such as how the repeat button is just an arrow going around itself. That's why the spirals at the top with the chess piece bishop things, as well as the figure 8 in the back, and even the tower itself, it's given the illusion that it's basically something that's wrapped around it. It's just a really clever way of conveying this idea of endlessness through these symbols. Now, while talking about the different emotion cards, there is a little bit of an elephant in the room that I forgot to address while first going through them, and that is with the eyes. The eyes are a really distinct feature of all these cards, and each of them have their own distinct designs that tie really well into the emotions of each card. With the Joy's Opus's eye, we have an eye that seems slightly closed, which really fits well with a lot of joyful facial expressions, as a lot of them would draw eyes as either completely closed or just partially closed. So this is a really cool detail. Additionally, the outside design of the eye has these little tails that are coming out of it that are slightly curved, and they sort of look like the heraldic sun design with its curvy tails as well. So kind of symbolizes a sun, and of course we know the sun is quite strongly associated with positive, happy emotions. The design for the Anger Opus's eye has a lot more very sharp edges in comparison to the Joy's Opus eyes, fitting in with the theme of danger and anger of the card, and does present it as much more menacing. The Sorrow's Opus's eye is pretty clear in what it represents. It is a crying eye, which not only fits in with the sadness of sorrow, but also does fit in with the reigning theme of the card. Additionally though, the outside of the eye again performs double duty as sort of looking like a thundercloud, so once again, more great graphic design to appreciate. And then finally we move on to Fear's Opus's eye. This card honestly features probably the most interesting out of all the 4 eyes, because unlike the other 3 eyes, which have relatively circular pupils for them, the pupil for Fear's Opus is very much not human at all. It honestly seems more like a reptile, or even a monster. And I think this is another way we can maybe explain why green was the color chosen to represent the emotion of fear. European mythology and folklore certainly has quite a few reptilian-inspired monsters or entities that would terrorize people. And especially along with the additional elements of the eye, such as how sharp it is, as well as what seems like talons that are sticking out from it at the bottom, these come together to really perfectly represent the fearful emotion of this card. Also, after looking at it for a little while, I just can't help to think about whether or not this is a subtle reference to the Eye of Saurion, just it being a reptilian eye being positioned at the top of the tower. In addition to the 4 emotion cards, there's actually one final card from Herbst Herzfolgen that is separate from the 4 emotion cards, and that is the Tomorrow's Opus card. Along with being paired with an incredibly awesome rendition of the main theme of Arknights, both the text and the card is very much in reference to Rhodes Island and the future. There are quite clear references to Rhode Island, with incorporations of the elements from the Rhode Island logo, such as the castle as well as a bunch of triangles. And my favorite part about the Tomorrow's Opus card is the eye, which I personally don't think is an eye at all. What I personally infer it to be is that one scene from Lone Trail when Kirsten opens up the star pod for all of Terra to see, and beyond the star pod are Terra's 2 moons that are exposed. In my opinion, it's a perfect way to symbolize the future. We have been given a glimpse into what the future holds for us, so we shall continue onwards with our journey. Happy 5 years, Arknights.